Hey everybody, I'm Chef Tom with allthingsbbq.com, and this is Crown Roast of Pork. All right, today we're gonna be preparing the Crown Roast of Pork. It's this really fantastic presentation, great for special get-togethers. It utilizes the pork loin with the Frenched bones, the rib bones still attached, formed into the shape of a crown, and today we'll be stuffing it full of a bacon apple dressing. So the first thing we're gonna do is prepare the bread for the stuffing. I have here an Italian loaf, a boule, about half of it here. We're gonna need only about 3 cups total once this is torn up. You could cube this up, or you can just do it kind of rustic by tearing it into pieces. But we need to dry this out a little bit. So we're gonna leave it here on the sheet pan, throw it in the smoker at 300 degrees, and let the bread dry up a bit. That way it doesn't turn into total mush for the dressing itself. I like to leave the crust on because it gives it a little bit extra texture. But you're always welcome to take that off if you want to eliminate that tough part of the bread. I think a crusty bread's ideal though. Now we're cooking on the Yoder YS640S today. We've got it set at 300 degrees right now. We're running apple pellets, and that's just while we kind of dry this out as far as the 300 degrees go. It's probably gonna take about 45 minutes, which is fine because we actually wanna let that pork soak in some marinade for a while. So let's get this in there, and then we'll jump back in to the pork and the remainder of the stuffing ingredients. So the pork we're working with today is a 10-bone section of the loin with the Frenched bones. This is from our friends over at Heritage Farm Cheshire Pork. Beautiful piece of meat. You can see they've cleaned the bones up for us a bit. We've got a little bit of that parchment on the back side here. You can take that off or leave it. It doesn't really matter because when we slice these to serve, you're never actually going to be eating from the other side of that. And we've got lots of other meat that's fully exposed that we can season and get some nice smoke flavor on. Now on this side we have a little bit of a fat cap. A lot of times I like to trim down a fat cap, but today what we're going to do is we're just going to score this so that we can get some extra flavor down in through there and let that fat really carry those flavors. So we're not gonna go super deep, just deep enough to kind of get through the surface there. Now let's talk about how we're actually going to assemble the roast. What we need to do is pull this thing around so that we get this appearance of the crown, right? But it's just a little bit too tight to just go ahead and tie it up the way it is. So what I like to do is come to the back side here, and we'll make some cuts to kind of accordion this out, and that's gonna give us what we need to connect to the ends there. We'll go a little bit here at the top, a little bit down here in the meat. And you guys can make some adjustments as you go. Start with small cuts, so you can always go deeper. And these cuts, especially down here on the loin itself, they're gonna look really cool as they start to cook down. You create a lot of extra texture, and it's visually a lot more interesting as well. So not only do we open this thing up so that we can bring it together in that crown form, but we also create some little crevices where we can get some extra seasoning in there. There we go. So that's working a lot easier now. Now eventually we are going to tie this thing up. You guys can see the accordion thing I was talking about. And we're going to put our stuffing in the middle. But before we do that, we want to let this soak up some marinade for about 45 minutes to an hour. So we want to get yourself a shallow baking dish just deep enough to kind of hold the roast, a layer of plastic wrap on top, and then we're going to go down with our marinade, just a layer here. And we've got the Smoke on Wheels barbecue marinade today, which olive oil base, it's got lemon, it's got lots of garlic, it's got fresh thyme, a lot of great savory flavors. And we'll place our pork, meat side down there. And then we want to smother the top as well. And just make sure that our marinade is in contact with the meat all across the surface. We'll wrap this up, and we'll let this soak, like I said, for about 45 minutes to an hour. Now while the pork's soaking up that marinade and the bread's drying out on the grill, we're gonna whip up the rest of the ingredients for the stuffing. It's gonna start with some very thick cut bacon, so we get some nice salty smokiness in there. We're gonna go with some caramelized onions. We'll get to some apples, hazelnuts, all great flavors that go with pork, especially in the colder months of the year. So we've got about a half pound of this steak cut bacon that we're gonna cut down into lardons. Want nice bite-sized pieces. And we'll transfer these right into the Lodge Dutch oven. Let's crank the heat up to about medium. And we'll let those kind of brown up while we prep the rest of the veggies and fruit. So next we're going to break down about half of one large sweet yellow onion. And we're gonna do this sliced thin. So let's set this aside while we process our apples. I'm gonna take all the skin off the outside here, so we're gonna peel these apples and get them diced up. We're kind of working in a sequence here, so we're gonna fully cook this bacon, render out all of the fat from it, and then we're gonna do some caramelized onions in that bacon fat, and then we'll get our cubed apples in there. So just follow along step by step. Cut around the core here, discard that. And then get some nice bite-sized pieces here. All right, so we got some nice browning on the bacon here, a lot of fat rendered out. We're gonna take this out for now so we can cook down our onions in the bacon fat. So you can see we got a couple tablespoons of that bacon grease left in the bottom, and we're just gonna leave that and add our onions. I'm also gonna do a shake of our whiskey barrel smoked salt. Let's start to soften these. Love that whiskey aroma added there. It'll be subtle in the end, but fun little addition. And then just kind of medium-low heat, we want to let these brown. We'll not take them to fully caramelized where they're just mush, but we do want to get some good color on them. So these things have really dried out, a little bit of softness left in the middle, which is great. That's right where we want them. So we're going to pull these off now. Also going to remove the second shelf at this time. So we're going to be cooking on the main surface. And I'll also go ahead and crank this up to 425 degrees, the roasting temperature that we're cooking at today. So these onions are looking pretty good now. We're going to add our Granny Smith apples. At the same time, we can also throw in our half cup of roasted hazelnut pieces. And I'm going to mince up about a tablespoon of fresh sage leaves to add as well. All right, so let's keep this moving for just a minute here. We don't need to fully cook these apples, but we'll start to soften them. Ooh, the aroma of the hazelnuts coming out now, that fresh sage, starting to smell really nice. All right, so we've created a lot of great flavor on the bottom of our Dutch oven here, and we're gonna get some of that up by deglazing with some hard apple cider. I'm gonna go 3/4 of a cup. And if you want to, you could use just regular apple cider. It's just gonna end up a bit sweeter. Or you always have the option of using just a vegetable or chicken stock. All of that alcohol is gonna cook off during the process, but creates a really unique aroma and flavor. So just working the bottom here, making sure we clean off the bottom of that cast iron. I'm now gonna add in a 1/4 cup of heavy cream. We can throw our bacon back in here. And then we'll start to work in our dried out bread, which will soak up all of this liquid. All right, we're done with the heat now, so I've turned off the induction burner. We're gonna work our bread into everything else here. And this is just gonna take a couple minutes. We're starting to soak this dried out bread. Add about half at a time. You may not need 100% of that bread. It also makes for some great croutons that you can serve with soups or on salads. Throw a little bit of seasoning on there. And this is looking pretty good. We want this to get just a little bit less chunky, and as the bread absorbs that liquid, that'll happen. Subtle sweetness of the apple, fantastic. Caramelized onion is great. A bite of bacon, gotta love that. This is right about where we want it to be. I'd say we could use just a touch more of that whiskey smoked salt. But other than that, this is pretty much ready to go. We're just gonna let it sit just the way it is. Once it's really cooled down, we're gonna add an egg to it, and that egg's gonna help bind everything together while it cooks. Well, we're ready to pull our pork out of the marinade now, and we wanna get some of that excess off of there. We'll leave a little bit behind as a binder for our seasoning and for the flavor. We want to get our seasoning on before we get this tied up as a crown roast, because once we do, it'll be difficult to get access to some of the meat. We're seasoning today with Oak Ridge Barbecue's Dominator Sweet Rib Rub. So this is a pork rub. It's got a bit of sweetness to it, as it implies, but that's going to complement well, contrast against the savory flavors that we've already added, but also brings in some of those holiday flavors like the cinnamon. I'm going to work this seasoning kind of down into our score marks as well. And let's not forget the ends. We can kind of touch this up once we get this into the crown roast, but we want to get a good start on it. All right, so let's get this guy formed up now. We're gonna take the two ends and bring them together. And one way to kind of get this to stay together while you're trying to get it tied, if you grab some skewers and come in from the end of one to the other, and that'll kind of hold it in place for you while you get your twine. So we're gonna get a good length of kitchen twine here. We come around the bottom where we want to hold this together. Go around a couple times here to get a good grip. And tie that off. And then we're going to do another one around the top, right around the bones, to hold that shape in place. There's nothing pretty about the process of putting this together, but you get through it. Now I'm going to take my skewers out, just make any adjustments that I need to the twine. We're just looking to make it really look pretty and presentable. Nothing terribly scientific about this. Also want to make sure that we do have a cavity that we can add some stuffing to, although that stuffing is going to mound up on the top here. And that is looking pretty solid. So I'm going to trim up the ends of our twine, finish off our stuffing, and we'll get this thing stuffed and on the grill. Now, finishing touches on the stuffing, we'll add our egg to kind of bind everything together. And you know how I like a little bit of hot sauce. Some Killer Hogs for the tang and the heat. That's an optional move. That bread's really absorbed that liquid, softened up, and this is looking great. Now we're going to come right in the center here to push our stuffing in there. This really helps to form that crown a little bit better because it's putting some pressure, pushing outward on those strings. And then we just start to mound it up right here in the center. There we go, looks good. So we've got our roast sitting on a wire pan, so we create a little bit of a barrier between any radiant heat. We're cooking pretty hot today, 425, so we want to make sure that we don't scorch the bottom. All right, so we're going right here on the main rack. Because of the vertical on this roast, we got to get that second rack out of there, which is why we're creating a little bit of extra distance with the wire rack. And here on top, cooking at 425, this is going to get really dark. So grab some foil, just to put right here on the top to keep the bones and the stuffing from getting too dark. We'll wrap that in there pretty tight. And about an hour in, we'll come take a look and see how it's progressing. Well, we're about an hour into our cook now, so I want to give you guys a progress report. Take a look at how it's progressing and how that color is looking. Well, we're starting to get some nice browning here on the edges. Let's take a peek at the bones. Oh yeah, that's looking good. Our stuffing is sticking a little bit. I think we can go ahead and uncover this for now. Try and get a nice crust formed on the top of our stuffing. If we see the bones getting a little too dark, we can always wrap those individually. And then I think I'm just gonna get in here with a probe so we can kind of monitor down there, and what we're aiming for is the deepest part of the pork on the other side there. We're sitting right at 90 degrees on the internal temperature, so we're just gonna let this ride probably for another 45 minutes before we check on the bones. Well guys, it's been 2.5 hours. Our probe is telling us that we've just crossed 140 degrees on the internal temperature, and this thing is looking beautiful. Great color and crust on top, great color on the pork itself, so we're gonna pull this thing off. All right, I'm gonna move this guy off to a plate. We're gonna let it rest for about 15 minutes before we slice into it. All right guys, moment of truth. Let's slice this thing open. Gonna take our string off of here. Get the one on the bottom. Now the way this works, you can actually slice right in between all of these bones to cut out individual chops. But let's start by cracking it right in half. Wow, look at that. Beautiful. Nice, juicy, fully cooked. We've added that 140 in the middle is exactly what we want to end up at. We've got our stuffing, keeping everything nice and moist in the center. Let's cut a chop out of here. Wow, that looks beautiful. Juice just ready to come pouring out. Gotta get a taste. This one's mine. Get a bit of that bark. Wow. The cinnamon's present, which is a great thing about that rub from Oak Ridge. Adds a little bit of that holiday spirit to your pork. And if you get into the center, that pork is just unbelievably moist. That stuff that's been resting up against the stuffing, that's money. Thank you guys so much for watching. Be sure to check out allthingsbbq.com for all of the products featured in today's video. If you enjoyed the recipe, hit that subscribe button. And if you have any questions or comments, or there's anything you'd like to see me cook, let me know in the comment section down below, and let's be good to one another. For more recipes, tips, and techniques, head over to allthingsbbq.com/thesauce. All Things Barbecue, where barbecue legends are made.